Hello and welcome to another short post-holiday episode where I wanted to give thanks to some fellow YouTubers and members of the model railroading community for sending along some very generous Christmas gifts. And I want to start this episode by thanking Sparky107107. He's a model railroader in Ontario, Canada, and he has a really cool shed where he has a huge HO model train layout that he's still building, and he often does live streams from that shed. And on Christmas Day, he did a live episode where he was giving away a lot of gifts, and I got lucky. I won actually several, but this was the one from Sparky himself. So this is a really cool N-scale 89-foot tri-level closed auto rack from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, BNSF, and it's made by Micro Trains. And I've actually been wanting to start getting some auto racks because I will have room on my upstairs layout to run larger trains like this. So this will be the first auto rack in my collection. This thing is beautiful. It is absolutely massive. And I enjoy watching auto racks in real life just because of the sheer size. It's just so impressive to see them go by. And I'm also an automotive enthusiast, so you like to imagine what kind of cars it's carrying inside of it. So hopefully the camera's focusing on this. You can see that this has a lot of really nice detail on it. And if you look at it next to my little switching engine and my Bud car, you'll get a sense of size. And then here it is behind my Lehigh Valley Alco C628, which is the largest locomotive in my collection. So that auto rack comes courtesy of Sparky and Otter Valley Railroad, who are in Tillsonburg, Ontario. So I haven't been up to Canada in many years, but if I get up there again, I will definitely check them out. And on Christmas Day, Sparky also had other guests on his live stream who were giving away gifts. And the next two gifts come courtesy of Michelle Kempema from the Colorado Model Railroad Museum. Michelle was a guest on Sparky's show. And I've got to say, first and foremost, I love seeing other women into model railroading. We definitely need more of us. So Michelle, it was great to meet you via this stream. And I was thankful to win 2 prizes. And because you've probably seen it in the background and you're wondering what this blue ball of fluff is, I'm actually going to talk about that first. If you're a Star Trek fan, you may recognize that that's a tribble. You may not understand why it's blue. Michelle had been making tribbles. She ended up with a blue one. We're calling it the Andorian tribble. Thankfully, she had it neutered prior to its journey to me. Otherwise, I would have just had to give up the model railroads to make space for all the tribbles. And if you've seen the classic Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And to the rest of you, go watch it. It's a classic. Anyway, I am thrilled to have this adorable little fellow. He has joined me here. And so the other gift that I received from Michelle for guessing a correct number, and I'll take it out of the box in a minute because you can't really see it in here, is actually, I want to say, the first car in my HO collection. I'll talk about that in a minute, and you'll actually see the first one in a minute. But this was the second to actually come into my possession. And Michelle is the executive director for the Colorado Model Railroad Museum. They're in Greeley, Colorado, which I looked on the map, that's northeast of Denver. And I've been to Denver. I don't believe the museum existed back then, and I was actually there for the Champ Car race and a wedding, so trains really would not have been on my radar anyway. But the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, they broke ground for it in 2002, and it has a 5,500 square foot operating HO layout that models scenes and runs trains from the former Oregon, California, and Eastern Railway. And I had never heard of this railway, so this was a fun opportunity to look them up on Wikipedia. So the Oregon, California, and Eastern Railway was a 64-mile rail line between Klamath Falls and Bly, Oregon. After 70 years of bringing logs from nearby forests to local sawmills, the former railroad right-of-way was converted to the OC&E Woods Line State Trail. And I'll leave the link to the Wikipedia article if you want to learn more about the railroad. You can look that up. And so that's a fun thing about getting model cars from a railroad you never heard of, is it gives you a good excuse to look them up. And I also happen to be fond of tank cars, and this was the perfect one for me because if you go back to my early YouTube days pre-pandemic, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the Lehigh Valley Phantoms hockey team, and coincidentally, this just happens to be their colors. So this is a GATC solvent tank car made by American Limited. Okay, so you can see that this was packaged up very well. It took a little bit of work for me to get this out. And this is a really nice car. I looked on the museum's website, which will also be linked to the video, and they sell these in the gift shop. And this is where I really get to appreciate HO because there's fine detail that you just wouldn't get on an equivalent N-scale piece of rolling stock. It actually has the air hoses modeled in. It has the brake lines. And the handrails are actually metal. Walkways feel like they're photo etched metal. The ladders probably are too. It's just a lot of really fine detail that doesn't necessarily show up in N scale. It's got a nice flammable placard on it that actually has not only the decal, but there's actually some depth to that sign itself. And what's really crazy is I talked earlier about how big this N scale auto rack is, and you can see that it's actually a little bit longer than the tank car, and it's nearly as tall. So that just puts in perspective how big those auto racks are. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Sparky and Michelle. And Michelle, if I'm ever out in Colorado, I'm going to look you up and check out your museum. It looks really cool from what I've seen online. Now, while we're on the topic of HO, I have to introduce you to my first HO locomotive. And this comes from our good friend RJ78 Productions. You know that he's a big Penn Central fan. And I met up with him the other weekend at Nick's Crossing's 24-hour live stream. And I was just checking out this Penn Central locomotive that he'd brought along, and I was very surprised when he said I could have it. Now, RJ got that locomotive secondhand. It was made by Model Power in Lima, Italy from the early to mid-70s. So for Penn Central, this is a fantasy locomotive, but it's based on the prototypical EMD FP45, which had different modifications depending whether it was used for freight or passenger service. There was a real-life Penn Central number 8002, but it was GP38-2, so I don't know what the inspiration was for making this fantasy unit, but I think it's pretty cool. It's a good-looking locomotive. So unfortunately right now I do not have anywhere to run HO other than on Friends layouts, and I do plan on changing that later this year. My father had a huge HO layout in the basement growing up, and even though I've always had N scale, I've also always considered it inevitable that I'll get into HO scale. And my sister and I recently started talking about helping each other out with some tasks this spring, and one of those things is going to be clearing out some space in my basement so that I can start an HO layout down there. And that will be a longer term project because for now I'm more committed to working on my N-scale switching layout and building my N-scale layout in the loft. So in the meantime, I'm just going to build a display so I can enjoy these until I can give them a place to run. And then last but not least, you've seen it in the background for this entire video, is this really cool sign over here that says Macon Train Station. And that's a gift that just arrived from my good friend Boondocking with Dennis. Check out his channel. He lives and works in his Ford F-150 along the Gulf Coast of Texas, although sometimes he takes road trips to show us other places. Really enjoy Dennis's channel. He's become a good friend, and I encourage you to check him out. So I already have in mind the perfect place to display this sign. There happens to be a perfectly sized space on the wall between my shelves and my switching layout. I'll just prop that up there for now. And I already told Dennis this sign needs just one minor modification. I think it needs a little black cat standing on that platform waiting for the train with me. And one of my upcoming projects is to get this Cricut Maker working. So I think I'm going to be cutting out a little black vinyl cat to stick there. So that'll be something to have fun with, and I will get that mounted on the wall soon. Alright, so that's going to be it for today. And that wraps up, I believe, all of the Christmas gifts that are going to arrive, at least for the 2021 holiday season. And we got a long ways till 2022. I'm trying not to wish the year away, even though, as you know, I'm fond of calling it the 25th month of 2020. So thank you everybody for watching, and more importantly, thank you to Sparky, Michelle, RJ, and Dennis for the generous gifts. And I'll leave links to their channels and websites in the description below.